like anything in this industry, it seems like it is a tool. That's the reality of it. It's just one tool, and there are cases where utilizing it might not be as efficient. And I think in beginners, using like a looser structure of it is better, because like we know as you get more advanced, like we have research that shows you can gauge your proximity to failure to a greater accuracy when you're more trained. And one of the ways we know that in support of that notion is experienced athletes can, like, their 1 RMs are generally a little bit slower than a 1 RM for somebody who's more of a novice. And so someone who's a novice might you know do a squat and might move pretty well. You're like, oh, they could, but to them, like that could be their, like, some of this is learning the scale, and some of it is just efficiency in the movement and being able to generate force at slower speeds. And that's one thing, though, when we talk about the perception of the scale, someone might do a 1 rep max and think, okay, this is my max. And you look at it, you're like, okay, well, there was, like, based on speed alone, this looks like you could have done 2 more. So that's just one part of why, like, the velocity is a little bit slower in trained lifters. But also, I mean, there's research that's just looked at, like, RPE, like, okay, rate your proximity to failure here, and then you keep going with the encouragement of researchers to see how many reps you actually get, and where is there a disparity there. And that disparity in terms of, like, subjective rating and actual true distance from task failure is that disparity closes as someone gets more well trained. And so, with that being said, I don't think it's not worth using for beginners. I just think you need to add it in conjunction, with a lot of, like, remote coaching. Like, if you're working with someone who's brand new to lifting, which probably isn't too frequent with remote coach. I'm sure it is sometimes, but I mean, a lot of people would benefit from having some, like, more hands-on, face-to-face training early in their training career. But even if you're, like, dealing with, like, a late novice, early intermediate, getting video feedback is good, because you can sort of gauge how far are you actually training in proximity to failure. The other thing to consider, using, like, a fully auto-regulated approach with just RIR, that's something I think that is probably better reserved for more advanced training ages. And one thing you have to consider here is the rate at which we adapt to training. Like, beginners, they're going to be able to add weight every workout. That threshold is going to keep going up at a pretty rapid rate for a beginner. It's going up because their capacity for performance is going up at such a rapid rate. Again, we're trying to keep pace with adaptations. And so, in order to do that, beginners can often get away with adding load every workout, and perform the same reps at the same level of effort as they did the workout before that. And so, having sort of a more proactive model in beginners, as long as their technique is accommodating, safely accommodating for it, you can get away with that a bit better. And it helps them, it challenges them to continue to keep pace. Because I think, if anything, some beginners are more reluctant to progress at the rate that they're capable of than are getting overzealous. I think sometimes you have to convince people, okay, you're stronger, like, we need to go up a little bit, or you need, you could do more reps there. Like, you don't see a bunch of people, like, raw beginners, like, overshooting their RPE quite as much as you would someone who's more advanced. So, but I think, this, we talked about, like, the longevity aspect, I think that's a big part of it. I mean, there are certainly benefits to using, scales like RIR when it comes to managing fatigue. And when you look at, like, the session as a whole, it's about the quality of work across, it's the area under the curve in terms of quality of work, across the session and across the week versus under a single set, and so it's easy to empty the tank on one set, have that be very stimulative, but then the rest of the training may suffer due to different categories of fatigue that can be occurring within that session and residually between sessions. So it helps manage the stimulus to help increase the conceptually that area under the curve in terms of what we're after, quality, volume. And I think that's one thing, you'll have the group, the camps that, let's train to failure. If you're not training to failure, you're not, trying hard enough. And if we're only doing one set per week or one set per session, that a case could be made for that. But, if we're going to failure too frequently, accruing a lot of fatigue, like later in the session, the training just isn't as effective for, a number of reasons. So, performance is down. You're not able to really, if there's a lot of fatigue early in the session, perhaps even train the muscle fibers that you're trying to train. Like your brain recognizes that those are fatigued, and like central fatigue will start to kick in, and you won't be able to, you're more limited in your ability to recruit those motor units. So, but outside of the physiological aspect, which is ultimately what I'm getting at here, is just the longevity component and being able to have a structured framework for progression, like when you're going to progress, and when you're like ensuring that you are keeping pace with your ability to perform. But knowing that, especially as I get older, I know like there's more volatility in my performance. It can be less predictable than when I was, in my early 20s, and I think some of that is just, the responsibilities of being older. You just have more on your plate. There's more stress. Like there's preparedness and recovery is going to be, in many cases, something you have to pay more attention to. I mean, and I was in college, and was able to train very hard in those years. And, it seemed like I was recovering from everything. Whereas now I just find as people become more advanced and older, it just needs to be a more strategic and reactive approach to managing the stimulus, making sure it's in that realm that we want, that band that we want, but knowing that some days you may fall a little bit lower on that curve than others. And that's okay, because ultimately, again, like you may lose out a little bit in that session in terms of magnitude of stimulus, but you're setting yourself up for more success, because now you're allowing yourself to sort of recover and play the hand that you currently have dealt to you. And then that's going to help you ensure your downstream performance is going to be as productive as possible. So I do think it's something that, just proximity to failure and RIR. I mean, RIR is just a scale for it. And I think all of us, before that became a well-known term in, the training side of things, it's, I think all people sort of intuitively know, like if I redline it on this set, like I'm going to be smoked the rest of the session, and so I think a lot of that, it just intuitively makes sense. But it's that fine line of making sure you're training hard enough and close enough to failure that you're, in that spectrum, that you're creating a stimulus for hypertrophy, but also being able to know and pick your spots on when you actually do push to failure, maybe at the end of a session or at the end of a mesocycle, things like that. And depending on the movement, there's some movements that you probably just shouldn't train to failure on. So yeah, I think it's a tool that has a lot of utility, and I use it a lot in my own programming as a coach. But there are cases where a more proactive approach, earlier in a training career, you can get away with that and may actually be advisable in many cases.